The table was set for 14. My mother had ironed the linen napkins herself. I could tell, because the creases were too sharp. The kind of sharp that only happens when someone needs everything to look perfect on the outside. White candles flickered down the center. The good china was out. The set she only brings up from the basement for Thanksgiving, and the kind of moments she's already decided are important before they begin. My sister Brooke sat at the far end, laughing at something her fiancé had said, her ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. She moved her hand a lot that night. I was watching all of it from my seat when my husband Marcus stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't smile first. He just rose slowly, the way he does when he's already thought through every possible outcome of what he's about to do and decided he can live with all of them. He picked up his phone, set it face down on the table, and looked across the room at my parents. "Before we get to the toasts," he said, "I think there's something this family needs to hear." My mother's smile flickered. My father set his fork down. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and stared at the candle nearest me like it might tell me what to do. "My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old. I'm an occupational therapist. And 8 months ago, I opened my own clinic in Austin, the thing I'd been building toward for the better part of a decade. I'm not going to pretend I didn't want my parents there for it. I'm not going to pretend it didn't matter. I grew up in a house in Charlotte where the unspoken rules were just as binding as the spoken ones. My sister Brooke is 4 years younger than me, and from the time she was old enough to want things, she was the kind of person who got them. Not because she was cruel, I want to be fair about that, but because she had a specific talent for needing things at volumes that filled a room. I was quieter by nature. I solved problems instead of announcing them. My parents called it maturity. I called it learning to be invisible in a way that felt like grace. Growing up, I told myself the difference wasn't favoritism, it was personality. Brooke was expressive. I was steady. The world needed both. I told myself that for a long time. Marcus and I got married 3 years ago. He's a data engineer. The kind of person who looks at a spreadsheet the way other people look at a novel, like there's a story in there if you know how to read it. He's calm in the way that sometimes makes people underestimate him, because they mistake quiet for disengaged. He's never disengaged. He just doesn't perform his attention. When I started seriously planning the clinic Westover Therapy Associates, named for the street where my grandmother grew up, Marcus was the one who helped me build the financial model. He sat at our kitchen table for 3 weekends straight, projecting revenue, mapping expenses, flagging risk. He never once told me it was too ambitious. He just helped me figure out what ambitious actually cost. I told my parents in January of last year. The opening was set for April 12th, a Saturday. Warm enough for the little courtyard out front to have flowers. Early enough in spring that the Texas heat hadn't turned brutal yet. My mother said, "Oh, Nora, that's wonderful." My father said he'd take the Friday off so they could drive down Thursday night. He'd never taken a personal day from me before. I wrote it in my planner in ink. For 3 months, everything felt like it was moving the way it was supposed to. My mother texted occasionally to ask about the color scheme. My father forwarded an article about small business tax credits. I made them a room reservation at the hotel 2 blocks from the clinic. Then Brooke called me in late March on a Tuesday evening when I was labeling supply cabinets, and I should have known from the way she said my name, bright and slightly too warm, the way she gets when she's about to ask for something that the shape of things was about to change. "So I have news," she said. She and her boyfriend of 14 months were engaged. He'd proposed on a weekend trip to Asheville the night before. I told her congratulations and meant it completely. I love my sister. I want to be clear about that too. Then she said, "Mom and Dad want to do a little celebration dinner at Maggiano's on the 12th. I paused in the middle of reaching for a label maker. "What time on the 12th? She hesitated, the half-second kind that tells you the person already knows the answer is a problem. 7. But we could probably push to 7:30. My clinic opening was at noon on April 12th. I said carefully, "Brooke, that's the day of my opening." "I know," she said, and she had the grace to sound slightly uncomfortable. "But it's just dinner. Your thing is in the morning, right? So it doesn't overlap. Your thing." I remember looking at the label maker in my hand and thinking, I've been planning this for 4 years, and it just became your thing. I told her I was happy to celebrate with her, just on a different date. She said, of course, but that our parents had already started looking at flights because her fiancé's family was coming in from Denver and it was easier to get everyone in one place. I said flights and thought, Charlotte to Austin is 2 hours. I called my mother that night. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting me. I didn't yell. I never yell. I just said, Mom, April 12th is my opening. She said, Honey, you know how rare it is to get his whole family together. They're coming from 3 different states. A pause. Then, your opening will have plenty of people there. It's not like we're your only guests. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I've been planning this for 4 years, and we're so proud of you, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the one that means the conversation is already over in her head. But Brooke needs us right now. This is a big moment for her, I wanted to say. So is this. I wanted to list every Saturday I'd spent studying for my boards, every loan application, every time I'd called her to talk about this dream, and she'd said, I know you'll get there. I wanted to hand her a timeline of the last 4 years and ask her to find the page where my moment became smaller than a dinner reservation. Instead, I said quietly, I understand. My mother said, You always do. That's what I love about you. After I hung up, I didn't move for a while. The room was dark, except for the light from the parking lot coming through the curtains. When Marcus came to find me, he sat on the edge of the bed next to me without saying anything. Just sat there. After a minute, he asked, How bad? They're not coming, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, why? I told him about the engagement dinner. He listened without interrupting. And when I was done, he said, Brooke could have done this the following weekend. I know, I said. They chose not to push back on that. I know, he nodded slowly. Something shifted in his face, not anger, exactly. The thing that happens when a number doesn't add up, and he needs to figure out why. Nora, he said carefully, can I ask you something about your grandmother's estate? I looked at him. Why? Just your aunt mentioned something at Christmas. About a fund. I didn't want to bring it up then, but I've been thinking about it. My grandmother had passed 4 years ago, when I was 27. She was the kind of woman who kept index cards in her apron pocket and remembered everyone's birthdays without writing them down. When she died, there had been estate paperwork, a small service, a lot of adult conversations happening in other rooms. My mother had mentioned at some point, almost in passing, that my grandmother had set aside some money for me, something earmarked for a major life investment, a business or a home, whenever the time came. My mother handled the estate. She'd said she would let me know when it was time to access it. I had never asked for a statement. In my family, asking to see proof was the same as saying you didn't trust someone, and I trusted my mother with the same trained reflex I'd trusted everything else she told me. I told Marcus this. He listened carefully, elbows on his knees. Do you have anything in writing? He asked. I thought about it. There was a letter. After the service. Some paperwork I signed. Do you still have it? I found it 3 weeks later in a shoebox in the back of our closet, tucked inside a folder I hadn't opened since the year my grandmother died. A letter from an estate attorney. A summary of the fund. An account number. My name listed as the sole beneficiary of a separate account intended for, as my grandmother had phrased it in her own handwritten addendum, a meaningful step forward in your life. The balance listed on the summary was $72,000. Marcus looked at the document for a long time. Then he said, What's today's date? Why does that matter? Because I want to know how long ago this was structured. He looked up. And whether it's still there? He didn't tell me what he was looking for. He never does. Not while he's still looking, because he doesn't want to alarm me over something that might turn out to be nothing. Over the next few weeks, he made calls. He requested documents. He found the name of the original estate attorney, who had since retired, but whose records were still accessible. He followed the paper trail the way he follows any data problem sideways, patiently, without announcing his suspicions, until he had something solid enough to stand on. He found it on a Wednesday night in early May, 3 weeks after my clinic had opened without my parents in the room. The opening had been beautiful, by the way. 50-some people came, colleagues, former clients, neighbors, friends. Marcus made a speech that made me laugh, and then made me cry in that order. We had sparkling cider and small sandwiches, and a ribbon my office manager cut with scissors she'd brought from home because we'd forgotten to buy proper ceremony ones. It was everything I had hoped for, except the 2 chairs in the front row that stayed empty. My mother sent flowers. Tulips, which are her favorite, not mine. On that Wednesday in May, Marcus came into the living room where I was reading and sat across from me and set his laptop on the coffee table between us. "I found the transfer," he said. The number was $72,000. The date was 14 months before my clinic opened. The sender was the estate account established under my grandmother's name. The recipient was a joint account belonging to my parents. The memo field said, "Disbursement." I stared at the screen. "Maybe it was transferred to them to hold for me," I said, because I needed to give it one possibility before I let it become what it already looked like. "I thought of that," Marcus said. So I kept looking. 3 weeks after that transfer into my parents' account, $68,000 moved again, into a separate account, one that Marcus had cross-referenced against public property records. It was the down payment on Brooke's condo, the condo she'd bought 18 months ago in Charleston, the one she'd told our entire family she'd saved up for herself, steadily, over 4 years. I was really disciplined, she'd said at Christmas that year. I just kept putting money away. I sat very still on the couch. The lamp in the corner buzzed with that faint sound it always makes, the sound I'd always meant to fix and never gotten around to. Outside, our neighbor was walking his dog. Everything was so ordinary that the information in front of me felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "It was supposed to be mine," I said. Marcus's voice was even. "Your grandmother designated it for you. Specifically, they gave it to Brooke without telling me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She doesn't know," I said, and I wasn't sure even as I said it whether I believed it. I asked Marcus not to do anything yet. I needed a few days to figure out what I actually wanted to do with the information. I'd spent my whole life managing my responses, calibrating, containing, translating grief into something that wouldn't inconvenience anyone. Old habits die slow even when the thing holding them up finally collapses. But I couldn't leave it alone. Not this time. I called Brooke on a Thursday morning and asked if she wanted to get lunch. I didn't say why. She said yes immediately, with the warmth she always uses when she's in a good mood, which she usually is when she has nothing to feel guilty about. We met at a cafe near her apartment, outdoor seating, sun through the umbrellas. She ordered an iced latte and talked for 20 minutes about wedding venues before I interrupted her gently. "Can I ask you something about your condo?" She tilted her head. "Sure." "The down payment?" I said. "Where did it actually come from?" She looked at me, the way people look when they're deciding how much they know. Not blank, considering. "I told you," she said. "I saved up. Brooke." I kept my voice quiet. "I've seen the transfer." The cafe noise kept going around us, someone's straw against the bottom of a cup, the hiss of a milk steamer. My sister set her glass down slowly. "It was a family loan," she said finally. "From Grandma's fund," I said. "The one she left for me." Brooke's expression did something complicated. Not shame, I want to be precise about this, more like irritation. The kind that surfaces when someone disrupts a story you've told yourself long enough to believe. "Mom and Dad said the fund wasn't designated," she said. "They said it was general estate money." "There's a letter," I said, "with Grandma's handwriting. My name is on it." She pressed her lips together. "Nora, you didn't even ask about it. You never brought it up, because I trusted them to manage it. They were managing it. For the family." I looked at her across the table. The sun was warm on my arms. A pigeon walked a small circle near our feet. "You bought your house with money that was supposed to help me build mine," I said. Not accusing, just saying it out loud, the shape of it, because I needed to hear whether it sounded as real as it felt. Brooke picked up her glass again. "I'll talk to Mom and Dad," she said. "I'm sure we can work something out." I nodded. I thanked her for lunch. I drove home, and when I got inside, I told Marcus everything she'd said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you want to involve an attorney?" I thought about it for the length of one long breath. "Yes," I said. "I do." The attorney was a woman named Carolyn, matter of fact and efficient. The kind of person who doesn't waste words or sympathy on things that don't require them. She looked at everything Marcus had compiled and told me that the fund, based on its structure and my grandmother's written addendum, had been legally designated for my benefit. My parents' transfer of those funds without my knowledge or consent and subsequent disbursement to a third party raised serious legal questions. She used words like breach of fiduciary responsibility and improper distribution. She drafted a formal demand letter requesting full restitution of the $68,000. Marcus reviewed it twice. I read it once, signed it, and set it face down on the kitchen counter. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I agreed to go to the engagement dinner. Marcus raised an eyebrow when I told him, "I want to be in the room," I said. He nodded slowly. Okay. The dinner was held at my parents' house in Charlotte the Saturday before Memorial Day weekend. My mother had rented folding chairs and pushed 2 dining tables together in the living room. She'd made her braised chicken, which is the thing she makes when she wants people to feel at home. Candles down the center of the table. The good china. Brooke at one end, her fiancé beside her, his parents across from mine. I sat between Marcus and my cousin Diane, who'd driven in from Raleigh, and kept squeezing my arm in that way that meant she knew something was wrong, but wasn't sure what. The first hour moved slowly. Wine, small talk, Brooke laughing too loudly at everything. My mother refilling glasses before they were empty. My father asking our future brother-in-law about his job in Denver with the exact cadence he used when he was performing interest. I ate. I smiled when addressed. I watched Marcus. He was quiet through dinner, which he always is in my family's house, not uncomfortable, just observing. About an hour in, when the plates were being cleared and my mother was about to bring out the dessert she'd been mentioning since we arrived, Marcus set his napkin beside his plate and stood up. Before the toast, he said, "I'd like to say something." My mother's head came up from the kitchen doorway. My father frowned slightly. Brooke looked at him with the careful expression of someone who has been waiting for a disruption and isn't sure which direction it's coming from. Marcus picked up his phone from the table. He pulled up a document. He didn't rush. "Most of you know that Nora opened her therapy clinic in April," he said. "What you might not know is that her grandmother left her a fund designated specifically for a major life investment, starting a business, buying a home. Her grandmother wrote that herself." He paused. That fund held $72,000. The room was very quiet. Brooke's fiancé looked between Marcus and Brooke. His parents held their wine glasses without drinking. Marcus turned his phone, so the screen faced the table, though really, he was talking to my parents. 14 months before Nora's clinic opened, that money was transferred out of the estate account, and $68,000 of it went directly toward the down payment on Brooke's condo. He said it without heat, like a data point, like something that just happened to be true. My mother set down the serving dish she was holding. The sound of it on the counter was the loudest thing in the room. My father said, "Marcus, I'm not finished," Marcus said, politely. He looked at the room. Nora didn't find out until recently. When she did, she spoke to Brooke. She asked for the family to make it right. That conversation was 3 weeks ago. He glanced at my parents. "We haven't heard back." My cousin Diane made a small sound beside me. I kept my hands in my lap. "Our attorney," Marcus continued, "has sent a formal request for restitution. I'm not raising this to embarrass anyone. I'm raising it because Nora has spent her entire life handling things quietly, privately, in ways that cost her and benefited everyone else in this room. And I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to be the kind of husband who watched that happen and called it keeping the peace." He sat down. The silence that followed had texture to it. Brooke's future mother-in-law looked at her hands. The fiancé's father cleared his throat and said nothing. My cousin Diane, quietly, under the table, found my hand and held it. My mother spoke first. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the fracture underneath it. "This is not the time or the place." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why we tried to handle it privately first." My father's jaw was tight. He looked at me, not at Marcus, at me, as if I were the one who had done something. "You're embarrassing this family," he said. I had been waiting for that line. I had heard it every time in my life I had pushed back on anything that mattered, every time I had refused to fold in the direction they needed me to fold. You're embarrassing the family, as if the family's dignity were mine to protect, regardless of what was done to me. I looked at my father steadily. The money was mine, I said. And it's gone. That's not an embarrassment. It's a fact. Brooke made a sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. Nora, I didn't know it was yours. They told me it was. I believe you, I said. And I did, partly. I believed she'd told herself a story that was easy to live inside. I believed my parents had made the paperwork easy to misunderstand. I believed there is a version of my sister who genuinely didn't let herself look too closely. But you knew it came from Grandma's estate, and you said you saved it yourself. She looked at the tablecloth. The dinner ended earlier than planned. Brooke's future in-laws found a polite moment to say they were tired from the drive. My cousin hugged me on the way out, a real hug, long enough to mean something. She whispered, I never knew. And I told her the truth, which was that I hadn't entirely known either. Not until I saw it in numbers. My parents didn't call that night. Or the next day. Brooke texted me 4 days later. 3 words. Are we okay? I held the phone for a minute, thinking about all the times that question had been asked in my family and meant, are you going to make this easy for me? I typed back, I hope we will be. But not yet. The restitution process was not quick, and it was not graceful. There were calls from my mother in which she cried about how hard she'd worked to hold the family together. There was a voicemail from my father that used the word ungrateful twice in 90 seconds. There was a period of weeks where the silence from Charlotte felt like a held breath, and I had to learn to let it just be silence instead of pressure. The money came back in installments over 5 months. The restructured account, per our attorney's guidance, now required my written authorization for any disbursement. My parents' management role was formally ended. I didn't post about any of it. I didn't send a message to the family group chat. I didn't need the last word. The last word was the paper trail, and paper doesn't need me to defend it. What I did do was take $2,000 from the first installment and replace the lamp in our living room, the one with the faint buzz I'd always meant to fix. It was a small thing, but something about doing it felt like punctuation. My cousin Diane called me about a month after the dinner. She'd been at my grandmother's funeral, she said. She remembered my grandmother saying something to her, privately, at the reception afterward, that she hoped Nora would know when to use what she had. She'd said it like it was important. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just held the phone. Then I said, I think I'm starting to figure it out. Months later, I ran into an old colleague from my previous clinic at a coffee shop. She'd heard I'd opened my own practice. She asked how it was going, and I told her the truth. Harder than expected, better than I'd imagined. The realest thing I'd ever built. She asked if my family had been supportive. I thought about the empty chairs at the opening, the tulips that were someone's favorite but not mine, the dinner in Charlotte, the candles, the good china, and my husband standing up with the calm of someone who had decided that the truth was more important than the comfort of pretending he hadn't found it. My husband was, I said. She smiled like that was enough. And that day, it was. There's something I've been thinking about since all of this settled. My whole life, I was praised for being the easy one. The one who understood. The one who didn't need much. My parents meant it as a compliment. I think they genuinely believed that my ability to absorb disappointment without making noise was a form of strength. But here's what I've learned. Absorbing things that should have been questioned isn't strength. It's just a different kind of loss. You lose slowly, in increments that feel manageable, until one day you look up and realize you've been paying for someone else's life with pieces of your own. The clinic is doing well. We added a second therapist in the fall. The courtyard out front has a new planter that blooms most of the year in colors I chose myself. My grandmother would have liked it, I think. She had a good eye for things that were built to last. Marcus has a photo of me on his desk, taken the day we opened. Ribbon, scissors, and all, and sometimes when I'm working late and pass his office, I stop and look at it for a second. I look like someone who showed up to her own life. That's the thing my family never quite understood. Quiet doesn't mean absent. Patient doesn't mean compliant. And the woman who never raised her voice still found a way to make sure the truth was the loudest thing in the room. They thought they were teaching me what it means to be a good daughter. What they actually taught me was what it costs to stay one.